Three men worked in the Empire State Building, and they worked on the 102nd floor. The building is 102 stories high. I'm not sure about there being an office on that floor, but stick with that for the story. One day, the elevator was out of service, so they had to walk up to their office. To pass the time, they decided that one would sing a song, one would tell a joke, and the third would tell a sad story, each taking a turn every floor until they reached the top. Finally, as they reached the 100th floor, one man sang his last song. As they reached the 101st floor, the second guy told his last joke. As they ascended the flight to the 102nd floor, the third man said, "I forgot the key." Now that's a sad story. I'm not real sure what it has to do with the sermon, but that's a sad story. A businessman who needed millions of dollars to clinch an important deal went to church to pray for the money. By chance, he knelt next to a man who was praying for $100 to pay an urgent debt. The businessman took out his wallet and pressed $100 into the other man's hand. Overjoyed, the man got up and joyfully left the church. The businessman then closed his eyes and prayed, "And now, Lord, that I have your undivided attention." He thought that might help. The following story appeared in the Prairie Overcomer. A fisherman who was out of fellowship with the Lord was at sea with his godless companions when a storm came up and threatened to sink their ship. His friends begged him to pray, but he demurred, saying, "It's been a long time since I've done that or even entered a church." At their insistence, however, he finally cried out, "Oh Lord, I haven't asked anything of you in 15 years, and if you help us now and bring us safely to land, I promise I won't bother you again for another 15 years. That story might evoke a smile, but it's really sobering to realize that prayer is often viewed as an escape mechanism rather than as a way of life. This may be true even of believers who call on God only when they've reached the end of their rope and there seems to be no other way to solve their problems. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 through 11, Jesus has some more things to say about prayer. Already in the Sermon on the Mount, he has said you should not pray this way, that is, for show, but you should pray for the hearing of God. He has given the Lord's Prayer, or more correctly, the example prayer. And now he has some more things to say on the subject. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be opened. Which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? One might think at first that these verses have no connection to what precedes or what follows, but indeed they do. The emphasis on prayer reminds hearers of their need for God's help in the doing of his will. After being told how to treat others in chapter 7, verses 1 through 6, do not judge that you be not judged, Jesus tells how God treats those who seek him in prayer. The depiction of God as a caring father anticipates the general principle of verse 12. Do to others as you would have them do to you. David Garland observes, disciples are to do unto others as they would ask, seek, and knock for God to do for them. We notice the order of these different ways of approaching God. We have the word ask. The word ask expressed desire. Philip Brooks defined prayer as a wish turned Godward. Ask also indicates a dependency on God. Seek. The word seek conveys a sense of urgency. In Jeremiah 29:13, the Lord said, "You will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart." Knock. The parallel passage in Luke chapter 11, verses 9 through 13, follows Jesus' parable of the man who would not take no for an answer when he was trying to get food for an unexpected guest. You recall that Jesus told how this man went to his neighbor, middle of the night, pounded on the door, said, "Can you give me 3 loaves? I've got unexpected company and I don't have anything in the house to feed them." And man, at first, the door's locked, we're all in bed. But Jesus says, even though he doesn't really want to help, even though the man's his neighbor, he does so because of his persistence. We ask, we seek, we knock. Jesus tells us to do that. And most agree that in the progression from ask to seek to knock, there is an increase in intensity. One writer illustrated the progression with the account of a child who has bumped his knee and wants his mother. He calls out for her, asking her to come. If there is no answer, he goes looking for her. If he discovers that she is in her room with the door shut, he pounds on the door until she answers. Another writer used the illustration of a man trying to locate an old friend. He asks regarding his friend's whereabouts. He seeks the place where he lives. Then he goes and knocks on his door. The overall message here is that we must be persistent in prayer. We should refuse to give up in expressing our needs to God. And this instruction is understood in the light of the petitions outlined earlier in the example prayer. Here is how you should pray. Here's what you should pray for. We notice some things from our text. God does not promise to answer everyone's prayers. That's not so much in our text, but I think that's the view of Scripture. We might say, well, isn't God the Father of everybody? Well, He is in the sense that He created everybody. But there are those who have a relationship with God and there are those who don't. Those who worship other gods or those who do not believe in God put an obstacle between them and God. We are expected to ask for the things God has promised. Jesus says, "Ask and it will be given." James writes in chapter 4, verse 2, "You do not have because you do not ask." Sometimes that's the problem. R.A. Torrey said, "We do not live in a praying age. We live in an age of hustle and bustle, of man's efforts and man's determination, of man's confidence in himself and his own power to achieve things, an age of human organization and human machinery and human push and human scheming and human achievement, which in the things of God means no real achievement at all. Sometimes we even take pride in what we view as our own accomplishments that we've done for ourselves. But we must realize we are dependent upon God. John Newton had received from the Lord some almost unbelievable answers to his petitions. And so he often engaged in large asking. In support of this practice, he would frequently tell the story of a man who asked Alexander the Great to give him a huge sum of money in exchange for his daughter's hand in marriage. The ruler consented and asked and told him to request of his treasurer whatever he wanted. So the man went and asked for an enormous amount. The keeper of the funds was startled and said he couldn't give him that much without a direct order. Going to Alexander, the treasurer argued that even a small fraction of the money requested would more than serve the purpose. No, replied Alexander, let him have it all. I like that fellow. He does me honor. He treats me like a king and proves by what he asks that he believes me to be both rich and generous. Newton concluded the story by saying, in the same way, we should go to the throne of God's grace and present petitions that express honorable views of the love, riches, and bounty of our King. God has the ability to give us great things. God hears and answers every prayer. Verse 8. The one who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, the one who knocks, the door will be opened. This, of course, depends on our relationship with God. There are two certainties when we pray. One is that God hears every prayer. The other certainty is that God answers, always answers. This verse says, for everyone who asks, receives. Now, did we read that right? Yes, it says everyone receives. But we have the misconception that the only possible answer to a prayer is yes. There are two other possibilities. God can say no, or he can say not yet. God hears and answers every prayer. Every prayer from every believer is heard and answered by God. Someone put it this way, if the request is wrong, God says no. If the timing is wrong, God says slow. If you are wrong, God says grow. But if the request is right, the timing is right, and you are right, God says go. D. Martin Lloyd-Jones wrote, I cannot imagine a better, more cheering, or more comforting statement with which to face all the uncertainties and hazards of our lives. It is one of those great, comprehensive, and gracious promises which are to be found only in the Bible. God hears us, God answers us. Now sometimes God gives us what we need and not what we ask for. Verses 9 through 11 have a little statement there that's kind of interesting. Some rhetorical questions, and they expect a negative response. But just which one of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? I wish you could have met my dad. He was almost as nice as me. He died 18 years ago this month. When I was very little, one time Dad was making homemade ice cream. Dad did have his honorary side. And as I recall, I was extremely young, but he said, if you can hold this piece of ice, and of course it had the rock salt on it as well, if you can hold this piece of ice in your hand and run around the house and bring the ice back to me, I'll give you a nickel or whatever. I don't think I accomplished that. That was pretty cold. Well, that little story from my past came to mind when I read these words of Jesus. What kind of a father, if the son asked for some bread, would give him a stone? Or if he asked for a fish, would give him a snake? Jack Lewis said, bread and fish were the staple Galilean food. While the waters of Galilee offered fish and its surrounding fields supplied bread, the shores had an abundance of stones and serpents to suggest the substitutes. But there's basically a comparison, or rather, really a contrast between human parents and God. Jesus says, if you then, even though you're evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? By saying, you being evil, Jesus is contrasting us with God. In comparison with God, we're just not so good, are we? But even a parent who's not the best usually will give bread and not a stone. God will certainly do better than we do. It is our relationship to God as Father that gives confidence in His benevolent care and goodness. We believe in God. We trust in God. We love God. We believe God will supply our needs. John Stott put it this way: so then, if we ask for good things, He grants them. If we ask for things which are not good, either not good in themselves or not good for us or for others, directly or indirectly, immediately or ultimately, He denies them. And only He knows the difference. Someone has written, I asked for strength that I might achieve. He made me weak that I might obey. I asked for help that I might do great things. He gave me grace that I might do better things. I asked for riches that I might be happy. He did not give them so that I might be wise. I asked for power that I might have the praise of men. I was given weakness that I might feel a need for God. I asked for all the things that I might enjoy life. I was given life that I might enjoy all things. I received very few of the things I asked for, but I received the things I had hoped for. Sometimes, it is certainly the case that God gives us what we need and not what we ask for. We should be very glad about that. Alec Morcher wrote, if it were the case that whatever we ask God was pledged to give, then I, for one, would never pray again, because I would not have sufficient confidence in my own wisdom to ask God for anything. And I think if you consider that, you will agree. It would impose an intolerable burden on frail human wisdom if by His prayer promises God was pledged to give whatever we ask, when we ask it, and exactly the terms we ask. How could we bear the burden? God knows what we need better than we know what we need. Lloyd Jones said, I thank God that He is not prepared to do anything that I may ask Him. I'm profoundly grateful to God that He did not grant me certain things for which I ask, and that He shut certain doors in my face. We have to trust God that God knows best. And we also need to remember that no prayer is ever wasted. William Barclay wrote, true prayer is asking God for what He wants, that your will may be done on earth as it is in heaven. Some years ago, a young man approached the foreman of a logging crew and asked for a job. That depends, replied the foreman. Let's see you fell this tree. The young man stepped forward and skillfully felled a great tree. Pressed, the foreman exclaimed, start Monday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday rolled by. And Thursday afternoon, the foreman approached the young man and said, you can pick up your paycheck on the way out today. Startled, the young man replied, I thought you paid on Friday. Normally we do, answered the foreman, but we're letting you go today because you've fallen behind. Our daily failing charts show that you've dropped from first place on Monday to last on Wednesday. But I'm a hard worker, the young man objected. I arrive first, leave last, and even at work through my coffee breaks. The foreman, sensing the boy's integrity, thought for a minute and then asked, have you been sharpening your axe? The young man replied, I've been working too hard to take the time. If we become too busy to pray to God, we're not sharpening our axe. We must spend time in prayer, talking to God. We must spend time in study, letting God talk to us. Do we become too busy, too hard at work to sharpen our axe? Prayer is the hone that gives you that sharp edge. Without it, the more work you do, the duller you get. R.A. Torrey wrote, "If we put so little heart into our prayers, we cannot expect God to put much heart into answering them." Paul Harvey told about a 3-year-old boy who went to the grocery store with his mother. Before they entered the store, she said to him, "Now you're not going to get any chocolate chip cookies, so don't even ask." She put him up in the cart, and he sat in the little child's seat while she wheeled down the aisles. He was doing just fine until they came to the cookie section. He saw the chocolate chip cookies, and he stood up in the seat and said, "Mom, can I have some chocolate chip cookies?" She said, "I told you not even to ask. You're not going to get any at all." So he sat back down. They continued down the aisles, but in their search for certain items, they ended back in the cookie aisle. "Mom, can I please have some chocolate chip cookies?" She said, "I told you that you can't have any. Now sit down and be quiet." Finally, they were approaching the checkout lane. The little boy sensed that this might be his last chance. So just before they got to the line, he stood up on the seat of the cart and shouted in his loudest voice, "In the name of Jesus, may I have some chocolate chip cookies?" And everybody round about just laughed. Some even applauded. And due to the generosity of other shoppers, the little boy and his mother left with 23 boxes of chocolate chip cookies. He was persistent, and he got his answer. Jesus tells us to be persistent in prayer, not to give up.